symposium, and the session is on integrity. The session is presented by Sportradar, which is a multinational corporation that collects and analyzes sports data. To speak on designing a sports agenda, an integrity agenda for a sports body, we have with us Mr. John Loffhagen. John, if you could join us on stage. John is a lawyer with on-site law and the president of IFSG. With over 20 years of experience in organizations such as IMG in London, John has been involved in the establishment, governance, and rule-making of the IPL and ISL, among other leagues.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Firstly, I'd like to thank Firstly, I'd like to thank Nandan for inviting me to speak. I've known him for many years. He's a great guy, and it's a pleasure to be involved in such a worthwhile event. Interesting to see the selection of sports jerseys as well. I wonder whether I'd be the only one. I did flirt with the idea of an England cricket jersey, but I didn't want to rub salt in the collective group. So I've gone instead with the 2003 England replica jersey, Rugby World Cup winning jersey. So I'm only upsetting Australians by doing that. There are fewer in the audience, I think. Having thanked Nandan, I also need to follow up with an apology. Anyone who probably knows me knows that this is what I'm likely to do, but anyone expecting snappy graphics or exciting audio-visual content is in for a disappointment, because I have no slides. Firstly, I don't trust myself in terms of using the equipment properly, and secondly, there's so much to get through. I think that would just distract me. I am going to give Nandan a copy of the paper that I produced, which underlies, I guess, this presentation, and there's a whole lot of additional detail in there, because I'm only going to be able to scratch the surface of this topic. So if anyone's interested in that will form part of the conference materials. So designing an integrity agenda for a sports body. So I'm going to talk about three things in particular today. Firstly, a very brief look at what we mean by integrity. Secondly, again, a relatively brief examination of why integrity is important to sport. And thirdly, how a hypothetical sports body would go about designing the most effective integrity program to safeguard its interests. So what do we mean by integrity? I thought the panel this morning was very interesting, and it got me thinking about this, and I totally get the divergent views, and of course money plays a part in sport, but to me, and I'm not meaning to sound self-righteous, the moment that money becomes too dominant and sport emerges and becomes simply entertainment rather than sport, then to me it loses something of its soul, and I begin to lose interest in it. And whether we succeeded or not in working on IPL, and I worked on IPL for many years, one of the things we wanted to do was try and maintain integrity on the pitch. Now, that sounds relatively laughable given some of the things that happened, but that was certainly the idea, to try and make sure that what happened on the pitch was hard but fair competition. So, what do we mean by integrity? I'm going to step away from it, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to say. In preparing this talk, I looked at various websites, and there are a number of definitions of integrity. The Australian Sports Commission describes integrity as follows: the integration of outward actions and inner values. A person with integrity does what they say they will do in accordance with their values, beliefs, and principles. A person of integrity can be trusted because he or she never veers from inner values, even when it might be expeditious to do so. A key to integrity, therefore, is consistency of actions that are viewed as honest and truthful to inner values. I don't think anyone would disagree with that, and the Sports Integrity Global Alliance states that its vision is to work towards a vision of sport played and governed under the highest integrity standards, free from any form of unethical, illicit and criminal activity, to safeguard sports values and ensure its positive impact and benefits to all citizens. Now, there's nothing wrong with either definition, but for the purposes of this presentation, I tended to distill it. Thank you, whoever did that. I've tended to distill it down to something a little simpler, and it's to do and not fail to do the right thing at all times. And I think the second aspect of that is almost as important as the first, and I've paraphrased quite a famous quote for the purposes of this presentation, that the worst people are not only those who commit wrongdoing, but are also those who turn a blind eye to it. And I think in framing rules and regulations, those of us that are involved in that, and indeed in the administration of sport, need to realise that if we do nothing, we make ourselves complicit if we're not careful in what might be going on. So, definitions of integrity, you can pick and choose, but I think we probably all agree that there are plenty of examples, sadly, in sport where there's been a lack of integrity. FIFA's conduct, for example, as was said in the first speech this morning, one of the depressing things was that no one was surprised when, lo and behold, FIFA was a corrupt organisation. I mean, who was surprised about that? The only surprise, perhaps, was the extent of the corruption in that sport. But all of the time, we all tolerated that. Very few people spoke up. Occasionally people did, but sponsors, fans, participants, we all allowed that low level of knowledge of corruptions carry on until I guess the stench became incapable of being withstood. And at that point, something was done about it. Cycling, institutional corruption in cycling. The decision in athletics by Russian executives when they discovered that an athlete had been suspected of doping. Instead of reporting it, they blackmailed the athlete and made money out of it. These are obvious examples of lack of integrity. So why then is integrity important to a sports body and to sports itself? Well, the simple answer is because to me sport is important in and of itself. And anything that damages sport must be bad in itself. But there are a number of other effects on a sports body and on sport itself where there's a lack of integrity. Most sports organisations, certainly the professional ones, will rely to a great extent on the exploitation of their commercial rights to fund elite and grassroots sport. And anything that damages the reputation of their sport will have a danger of reducing the value of its sports rights and therefore reduce the amount of money it's able to devote both to elite and to grassroots sport. And this isn't theory. There are a number of examples. Again, the FIFA corruption, some of their top sponsors were threatening to withdraw unless steps were taken to address the situation, with certain sponsors even demanding the actual resignation of Sepp Blatter. At the height of the athletics scandal, 2 serious top sponsors walked away early from their sponsorship commitments, Adidas and Nestle, with Nestle being quoted as saying, "We've decided to end our partnership with the International Athletics Federation Kids Programme with immediate effect. This is our decision given the negative public perception regarding corruption allegations and doping in sport against the IAAF. We believe that this could adversely affect our reputation and image and therefore have terminated the existing contract." So this isn't a matter of theory, this is actual damage to the value of sports rights. Secondly, where there's an absence of different aspects of integrity, this can lead to physical harm on and off the pitch, and I'll come on to talk about both later. And in particular, where children are concerned, this can lead to an adverse effect on the numbers of people participating. If parents don't believe that a sport is safe, and I think sports such as rugby, and we'll come on to that, have issues as regards safety on the pitch, or if they believe that their children won't be safe off the pitch in the company of coaches, etc., then they're less likely to let them play. It's as simple as that. And this cannot be good for sport, and every sports body has to be cognizant of that. Finally, as far as a sports body is concerned, if it doesn't do its job, then it's likely to face liability. Most sports bodies will have either an express or implied duty of care to all those involved in the sport, be they participants, spectators, coaches, etc. And again, this isn't, and if they fail to uphold that duty, they leave themselves open to legal proceedings. And again, this isn't academic, this isn't hypothetical. In the US, the NFL is likely to pay upwards of $750 million to former players who brought actions saying that there wasn't sufficient education and sufficient protection against concussion-related injuries. And closer to home in the UK, there's a case where a motorcycling body was found guilty, effectively, of not complying with its duty to inspect a racetrack, and it was liable to pay damages. So there's absolute specific examples of why it's in a sports body's own interest, even if it can't think of any other reason to act with integrity, that the potential liability should be reason of itself. So, how do we go about constructing an effective integrity agenda for our hypothetical sports body? The first thing, perhaps, to notice is that very few sports bodies, perhaps none now, act in isolation. In a country such as France, each federation will actually derive its authority from the state. They're granted an exclusive license to regulate and administer the sport, and so everything they do, being derivative from the state, they have to have regard to local legislation, etc. And even in a country like the UK, where sports bodies don't have that derivative authority, nonetheless, where they obviously have to comply with local law, but when they receive public funding, as they often do now, that comes with strings attached in terms of doing the right thing. Obviously, any sports body in Europe, in the European Union, will have to have regard to European legislation. It'll be interesting to see how long that legislation applies to the UK, but that's another matter. And then there are the presence of worldwide agencies such as the WADA, and we'll come on to that later, as well as crime enforcement agencies, and again, we'll touch on that. So no sports body will act in isolation, and in framing and enforcing its regulations, it has to have regard to all of those things. Now, when I was writing this presentation, the next item I wanted to talk about almost came last when I first started scribbling notes, and it gradually moved further and further up the list, and I've actually got it as my number one thing, and it's leadership. Because I think if a sports body can get strong, independent leaders who are passionate about their sport, then in a beneficial way, that ethos will hopefully permeate down throughout the organisation and have a beneficial effect. It's a little bit like a decent headmaster or headmistress as a school, I guess. Sadly, as we've seen, the converse is also true. The next thing, and we've already touched on this, but very briefly, a strong constitution, a clear constitution, has serious benefits as far as the integrity of an organisation. As we touched on a great deal, the debate about DCCI's constitution throws this in light today. There should be a professional executive, to my mind, with an independent board that oversees that executive. And the elections for that board should be free, fair, transparent, with sensible restrictions on tenure of office. There should be proper diversity, financial transparency. All of those things can be derived from a decent, professionally drafted constitution. It goes without saying that a sports body needs to have rules and regulations. And we'll come on to how those apply to various elements very shortly. But a disciplinary process should be part of that, and a disciplinary process that again is clear, is fair, is transparent, where there is independence in terms of the judicial officers. They shouldn't be part of the executive, and there should be a fair appeals process. All of those things, I think, are key to enhancing a sports reputation. In terms of its commercial partners, I think sports bodies need to be careful now. We live in the real world. Sports bodies need money. No one would deny that. But I think they need to be careful about their choice of partners. To take tennis as an example, tennis has been, and I'll come on to it in more detail, but there have been a number of rumours about match fixing in tennis. And for the International Tennis Federation and the Australian Open to have betting companies as part of their sponsorship programme, to me, sets the wrong tone, and it's interesting to see that the ITF has decided to step away from that. Most sports bodies will have rules and regulations dealing with doping, and in all probability those derive from the WADA code, because many countries are now effectively signed up to ensuring that their national doping authority has rules and regulations which are consistent with the WADA code. That almost goes without saying. I think one of the key things to me is to ensure independence within a sports body in terms of the monitoring and prosecution of doping offences, because interestingly enough, WADA and the national agencies don't tend to be involved in that. We have a saying in the UK, I don't know whether you have a saying here, that turkeys don't vote for Christmas. And if you have the same guy who's involved in the commercialisation of sport, who is also responsible for unearthing and prosecuting doping or corruption offences for that matter, then those offences are likely to get swept under the carpet. And again, sadly, this isn't theoretical. In the world of cycling, I was trying to think whether this was at the height of the scandals that afflicted cycling, but there have been so many peaks and troughs in terms of the doping scandals that it's just another of the peaks where the Cycling Independent Reform Commission was tasked with investigating allegations both of doping but also complicity in the doping by the cycling's sports body, UCI. They found a number of examples, and I'll quote from its report. It said, the allegations and review of UCI's anti-doping program reveal that decisions taken by UCI leadership in the past have undermined anti-doping efforts. Examples range from adopting an attitude that prioritised a clean image and sought to contain the doping problem, to disregarding the rules and giving preferential status to high-profile athletes, the likes of Lance Armstrong, to publicly criticising whistleblowers and engaging in personal disputes with the stakeholders. Another example that they found was the likes of Lance Armstrong were allowed to hand in backdated doctor's certificates for therapeutic use exemptions. Extraordinary acts of complicity in undermining anti-doping efforts. Any sports body that finds and prosecutes anti-doping needs to have regard to local and at times international law. It's easy just to think that anyone found guilty of anti-doping should have a lifetime ban and that's it. Well, the British Olympic Association tried that with Dwayne Chambers. And lo and behold, after a few years, that got set aside by the Court of Arbitration for Sport, and he was entitled to compete again. So sanctions have to be, if they're going to be effective, have to be lawful and proportionate. Just as an aside, and one of the things I found interesting reading it was when Ben Johnson's application to set aside his ban was upheld, the court said it did so not only because it thought that Ben Johnson was sufficiently guilty for the ban to remain in place, but also they thought that the substances that he would likely to be taking, if they allowed him to compete again, would be harmful to his health. So they actually upheld the ban in part for his own physical well-being. Corruption is, of course, a major threat to any sport, and any sports body that doesn't have due regard to that is in dereliction of duty. The growth in betting in sport and the means of betting have attracted a criminal element, and this has increased the incidence of match fixing without doubt. So what does a sports body do? Well, the first thing to note that unlike anti-doping, match fixing, call it what you will, all of the various permutations, can sometimes be criminal offences. And any sports body, therefore, that finds suspicions of that will probably have to be liaising with the local police. And in some cases, certainly in the UK, in some cases, the state doesn't appear to take an interest. In others, we've seen cricketers imprisoned in the past for match fixing, as we all know. So the state does get involved. And in those circumstances, a sports body tends to put its own inquiry, its own disciplinary proceedings on hold. Very topical in terms of English cricket, when the ECB now has to turn to Ben Stokes, Alex Hales, to decide what internal disciplinary sanctions they impose, with Stokes having been found not guilty, and Hales not having been charged, despite there being obvious evidence of certain wrongdoing. It could be very interesting to see what the ECB does about that. Very interesting, and I've read some reports that suggest that Alex Hales may suffer more for having not been charged than Stokes, who did get charged and thereby missed the Ashes series. So I thought, rather than, in terms of corruption, rather than just listing endless examples, it's sad to say there are endless examples, would be to look at one particular sport, which I tend to know a little bit about, and that's tennis, where the 2018 Independent Tennis Review Panel found a tsunami of corruption, as it described it, at the lower levels of tennis. And anyone who doesn't know the world of professional tennis, the likes of Roger Federer, Rafa Nadal, Novak Djokovic, very unlikely to get involved in match fixing or any form of that, because they don't need the money. Those who are 250, 400 in the world, who are playing in tournaments where the entire prize money is $15,000, and if they go out first round, they're not even going to cover their expenses, and they're playing in a match where there's no cameras, but yet the ITF sells the match data direct and live to bookmakers. These are the people who are likely, because of the structure of the sport, to fall foul of that. Now, that's not to defend it, but let's be sensible. That is a more likely scenario, and any sports body needs to look at the structure of its sport to decide whether it can make changes to make such circumstances less likely. And I can give concrete examples. I find it very interesting. My son is trying to make his way as a young tennis player and spent 3 weeks in Uganda at one of his first professional events, at one of these events where the prize money is $15,000. And he came home proudly. I think he came home with, after 3 weeks, with $1,300 in cash, which I found slightly bizarre, but there you go, $13 in cash that he slammed on our kitchen table proudly, saying, I can start to contribute. Well, that's fine, because I'm paying his way. I'm paying his flights. I'm paying for the coach. The guys out there who are making their own way, the 25, 26-year-olds, someone comes up to them and says, I'll give you $5,000 to lose the match. I mean, they're going to be tempted, let's be honest. And it was fascinating too. When I had time, I was following some of the scores in these matches, and there's an app called SofaScore, which allows you to follow the change of the score live. And it's an app that's also linked to betting. I don't bet on sport myself, but it's an app that's linked to betting. And when you click on the comments on this app, you can see people who are betting on my son's match. He's in Uganda. They're clearly in Russia by the look of some of the language. And they're betting on this match. Amazing. And not only that, they're then starting to get annoyed when, certainly in his first match, because no one had ever heard of him, he was winning, and the other guy's losing, and the other guy's the favourite. They're starting to say match fixing and allegations of corruption. And George proudly announced, when he came home from Uganda, that he'd received his first hate email. Seriously, because someone was saying that he'd either thrown the match because that he lost, or there was some kind of fixing going on. I mean, these tennis has to take a long, hard look at itself, and any other sport that has a similar structure, where the economics don't work, needs to do the same thing. Obviously, sports bodies can take proactive steps. They can appoint agencies to monitor betting patterns, and that can help detect match fixing. But I think something like tennis, the problem's more structural, and it needs to take account of that. And one other element of match fixing, and when you draft rules and regulations and you include a provision, for example, that obliges teams to compete to the best of their ability, you almost write there and think, well, that kind of goes without saying, but I'll write it anyway. And then you find examples of where teams don't play to the best of their abilities. It goes back a long time. The 1982 World Cup, the last pool matches, didn't take place at the same time. You Google the match Germany-Austria in Spain, where I think of Germany, if I remember rightly, Germany won 1-0, then both countries went through. Well, surprise, surprise, Germany won 1-0. And by midway through the first half, the crowd was going mad, chanting at both teams. But nonetheless, they played out a 1-0 game. Closer to home and nearer in the 2012 Olympics, I think. Maybe it wasn't the 2012 Olympics, but badminton pair, again. Couples of badminton pairs not winning because they're plotting their path out of the pool qualification stages and working out that if they lose, they have an easier draw, or they don't play someone from their own country. These things go on, and sports bodies need to take notice of. So the number of other things sports bodies can do, leaving aside the two main examples in challenges to integrity being doping and corruption, I think education is of vital importance. It's all very well having rules and regulations that are hopefully clear, but athletes are running around, coaches are running around, parents are running around, we're all busy. Sports bodies need to make it easier, to my mind, for these people to be made aware of the rules and regulations. And in today's digital age, that is really easy to design an effective e-learning program. I think that's much more easy for people to digest, and you also can have a click button where someone's actually saying, yes, I've read this, I agree to this, there it is, the evidence is there. Player welfare and safety is of particular concern, I think. And not only on the pitch, as I mentioned, the world of rugby at the moment, they are very concerned about the impact of professionalism on the sport, the incidence of injury at adult level, of concussion nature seems to be growing. And when you apply that into the schools scenario, you have parents who are rightfully worried about whether rugby, fantastic sport as it is safe to play for children. On a different level, I've seen sports bodies where their desire to have success means they want their players on the pitch, on the court. Now, particularly when these players are children, the risk of injury is heightened. And there has to be a balance between a federation's desire to engender success from its elite athletes and the athlete's right not to be injured. In terms of child abuse, I think sadly that it's a tip of what hopefully will be a small iceberg, but the FA in the UK, the LTA have both had instances where coaches have been involved in child abuse. People have known about it, moved them on, tolerated it. Sports bodies need to get the message out. They need to have clear rules. These kinds of things are intolerable in today's age. Mental health, I think, in terms of players, seems to be an increasing concern. And I think any player welfare program should take account of mental health issues, as well as transition to retirement. Oh, that's what the sign says. Sorry, you need to hold that sign higher and louder. 2 minutes left. Right, I need to hurry up. So I'm going to whiz through some of the other things. Transition to retirement. We've had an example recently of a UK badminton player, medalist at the Olympics, bankrupt in the mid-30s. Bankrupt and depressed in her mid-30s. So I'm just going to run through some other headings now. Now I've got my 2-minute warning. Club ownership. I think sports bodies need to look and have rules regarding multiplicity of club owners. UEFA EPR's rules preventing one body owning two clubs for obvious reasons. Financial regulations in terms of obviously transparency, but also salary caps, break-even requirements, financial fair play requirements, all go to making a sports body integrity, have the correct integrity. Fans care about their clubs, and a sports body should be doing its best to make sure that those clubs are run in a responsible financial way. And then there would also be provisions relating to insolvency of clubs, responsible reaction to insolvency, also a lawful reaction to insolvency. I won't go into the details, but when you have a situation where some creditors are preferred over others, you run the risk of legal challenge. An ethics officer, I think this is really important for sports body, and that ethics officer should not report to the executive. To my mind, it probably shouldn't even report to the board. I think there should, in an ideal world, there will be some central national agency where ethics officers are seconded to sports bodies so that there's a clear independence and they're able to raise a flag when something's going on. And that brings me on to whistleblowing, where again, I think there needs to be a channel for anyone who has any suspicion to be able to report it on an anonymous basis. So time up now, thank you. Well, I've just about finished now. So anyway, by way of conclusion, I don't mean to sit here and sound like I'm lecturing anyone. I'm not holier than thou. I'm not self-righteous, hopefully. But I do care about sport. And I think sport is such a valuable thing, just in and of itself, in what it teaches and what it brings. And if sports bodies can devote greater attention to protecting the integrity of their sport, then they do everyone a favour. Thank you. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Hi sir. I found that anecdote you gave of your son receiving a rookie made really fascinating, because I feel what's happening in a lot of sports now is that there's a feeling of cynicism getting engendered within the fan base itself. In the sense that, like, if let's say there's a football game going on, there's a last minute winner. So earlier everyone was just accepted for like the magic of the sport, but now there's a feeling of someone instinctively speaking match fixing, right? So I feel that a fear of mine with that would be that would kind of engender it within the minds of the players themselves, that people expect you to anyway be, indulging in these stuff, and maybe that does push you further into corruption, and then I feel maybe that makes corruption even more systemic. So do you feel that's a legitimate fear that could be coming up more in sports, and if so, like, how do you counter that?
I mean, absolutely. I don't think match fixing is probably a new phenomenon at all, in the same way as doping isn't a new phenomenon. I just think it's more of it probably now that there's increased betting, and I don't really know what you do about that, because I think, like you say, when you watch a sports competition now and something does happen, someone drops a catch you think they should hold in cricket, or there's a last minute winner, or someone plays a shot in tennis that you think, oh, that was, I could have done better than that. You are suspicious, and rightly so. And that's the problem about reputation, isn't it? Because once it's lost, it's really hard to get back. I have no idea what you do about it. Yes, sir.
I have moved thought, it's like these sports moving towards more fan-friendly, friendly to the viewer. But I mean, like, when you talk about the fact that the badminton players were pulled up and disqualified for using the match intentionally, these players have put in years and years of effort to get to such a stage, and to deny them an easier path to a medal seems to be like a bit unfair.
To them, this is just a thought that I have.
No, it's a moral dilemma. That I get it. They want to win. It's not like they didn't want to win the thing in total. They just wanted to chart an easier path. I think the problem with it is that people pay to turn up and watch that match, and as a fan, you're expected, you're entitled to see people competing. Otherwise, take away the money, play for free.
It's just a perspective. I think nowadays nowadays we have more fantasy leagues where even fans tend to want the players they are picked to be performing. So maybe there is also a pressure from betting side and fantasy teams, which may be pushing the athletes to go on the other way around. What do you think?
Well, I don't know. I would certainly hope not. You know, I think, you know, in a team sport, you know, individual sports are always more likely, I think, to be the victim of match fixing. You know, you're just dealing with one player. And I was at an event last year when I asked a guy whether there was a sport which seemed to be immune from match fixing, or more immune than others. And his reply was rugby union. It seemed to be one where there was less incidents of match fixing. It'd be very interesting to know why a sport like rugby union has less incidents of match fixing, and whether that's because of the team ethic, or there just simply isn't enough money in it, or not enough people care about it to bet sufficient sums on it. Would be interesting to know. I mean, you raise an interesting point. I don't sense that that's an issue at the moment. I think there are enough significant criminals in the sport, around the sport, that bring the problems, rather than those kind of things in and of themselves. Okay. Thank you, John.